Mel Blount, the cornerback who was too physical for the modern game. In the 1970s, the Pittsburgh Steelers dynasty was built on defense, a smothering unit known as the Steel Curtain that struck fear into opposing offenses. The heart and soul of that defense was Mel Blount, a cornerback who was so big, fast, and physical that he revolutionized the position and ultimately forced the NFL to rewrite its rulebook. At 6 feet 3 and 205 pounds, Blount was a physical freak with the size of a linebacker, the speed of a sprinter, and the instincts of a ball hawk. Blount was the undisputed master of the bump and run technique, where a defensive back would physically challenge a receiver at the line of scrimmage, disrupting their route and throwing off the timing of the passing play. But Blount took this to an entirely different level, using his massive frame and incredible strength to completely dominate receivers from the moment they stepped onto the field. What made Blount so devastating was not just his physical tools, but his football intelligence and understanding of how to use the rules to his advantage. In the 1970s, there were virtually no restrictions on contact between defensive backs and receivers beyond the line of scrimmage, which meant Blount could essentially maul receivers for the entire length of their routes. He would grab, hold, push, and shove receivers all the way down the field. The Blount opposing team's best receiver, out of the Game Hall of Fame receivers like Lynn Swann, would later say that practicing against Blount was more difficult than playing against any other cornerback in the league. Opposing coaches would alter their entire game plans when facing the Steelers, often choosing to avoid Blount's side of the field entirely. During his 14-year career, all with the Steelers, Blount intercepted 57 passes and returned them for 736 yards and 2 touchdowns. He was selected to 4 Pro Bowls and named first-team All-Pro twice, but these accolades barely scratched the surface of his impact. Blount was a key member of 4 Super Bowl-winning teams, and his ability to shut down passing attacks was crucial to the Steelers' success. But Blount's dominance came at a cost to the overall entertainment value of the NFL. By the mid-1970s, offensive production had declined significantly, and many games were becoming low-scoring defensive struggle. The league's television ratings were suffering, and there was growing concern that the game was becoming too defensive-oriented. In 1978, the NFL took decisive action, implementing the Mel Blount rule, which limited contact between defensive backs and receivers to a 5-yard zone beyond the line of scrimmage. After 5 yards, defensive backs were prohibited from making contact with receivers unless making a play on the ball. The rule was designed specifically to prevent physical cornerbacks like Blount from dominating receivers and to open up the passing game. The impact was immediate and dramatic. Offensive production increased significantly, and the NFL entered the modern era of pass-happy football. The rule change helped launch careers of quarterbacks like Dan Fouts, Joe Montana, and Dan Marino, who took advantage of the new restrictions to put up unprecedented passing numbers. Deacon Jones, the head slap that terrorized a generation of linemen. David Deacon Jones was one of the most feared defensive players in NFL history, a pass rusher whose innovative techniques and relentless pursuit revolutionized the defensive end position and forced the league to ban one of his most effective weapons. Playing primarily for the Los Angeles Rams during the 1960s and early 1970s, Jones was the leader of the famed fearsome foursome defensive line and was credited with coining the term sack. Jones was a physical specimen who combined incredible speed with surprising strength and an almost supernatural ability to anticipate the snap count. At 6 feet 5 and 272 pounds, he had the perfect build for a defensive end, with long arms and the flexibility to bend around the corner when rushing the passer. But what truly set Jones apart was his signature move, the head slap. The head slap was a brutal and devastatingly effective technique where Jones would use his massive hands to deliver a powerful blow to the side of an offensive lineman's helmet, stunning them for a crucial split second and allowing him to get past before they could recover. Jones had perfected this technique to an art form, using different variations depending on the situation and opponent. What made the head slap so effective was not just the physical impact, but the psychological effect on offensive linemen. Players knew they were going to get hit in the head every time they faced Jones, and this knowledge would often cause them to hesitate or flinch at crucial moments. Jones used the head slap to terrorize opposing offenses throughout his career, recording what would have been astronomical sack numbers if the statistic had been officially tracked. Football historians estimate Jones would have had over 150 career sacks, including several seasons with 20 or more. His dominance was so complete that opposing teams would often use multiple blockers to try to slow him down. The head slap was not just effective against offensive linemen. Jones would also use it against running backs and tight ends who tried to block him. He was particularly devastating against smaller, quicker players who relied on technique rather than size, often knocking them completely off their feet and creating massive disruptions in the offensive backfield. But the head slap was also dangerous, leading to numerous injuries and concussions. Offensive linemen who faced Jones would often suffer from headaches, dizziness, and other symptoms we now recognize as signs of traumatic brain injury. Some players' careers were shortened or ended due to the cumulative effects of repeated head slaps. The NFL finally banned the head slap in 1977, making it a penalty for defensive players to strike offensive players in the head or neck area with their hands or arms. The rule was implemented primarily as a response to Jones's dominance and growing awareness of the dangers associated with repeated blows to the head. Jones was philosophical about the rule change, understanding it was necessary for player safety, even though it diminished his effectiveness. He continued playing for several more years after the ban, adapting his technique and finding new ways to beat offensive linemen. He was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 1980 and is still considered one of the greatest defensive players of all time. Tom Dempsey, the half-footed kicker who redefined what was possible. Tom Dempsey was one of the most unlikely and inspirational players in NFL history, a kicker who overcame significant physical limitations to achieve greatness and ultimately forced the league to change its equipment rules. Born with no toes on his right foot and no fingers on his right hand, Dempsey faced challenges that would have ended most football careers before they began. Dempsey's physical limitations were the result of a birth defect that left him with a club foot on his right side and a partially formed right hand. Most people with these conditions would never consider playing football, but Dempsey was determined to overcome his disabilities and pursue his NFL dream. He developed a unique kicking style that took advantage of his unusual anatomy, using his flat, stub-like foot to create a larger contact surface with the football. To accommodate his limitations, Dempsey wore a specially designed kicking shoe with a flat, square toe instead of the pointed toe standard on most football shoes. The shoe was custom-made to fit his unusual foot shape and designed to maximize the surface area that came into contact with the ball, giving him a theoretical advantage over other kickers. Dempsey's most famous moment came on November 8, 1970, during a game between the New Orleans Saints and Detroit Lions at Tulane Stadium. The Saints were trailing 17-16 with seconds remaining when they lined up for what seemed like an impossible 63-yard field goal attempt. The distance was far beyond what anyone thought possible, as the previous NFL record was 56 yards. But Dempsey had been booming kicks in practice all week, and Saints coach J.D. Roberts decided to give him a chance to make history. The snap was perfect, the hold was clean, and Dempsey connected perfectly, sending the ball on a high, arcing trajectory toward the goalposts. The 63-yard field goal was not just a new NFL record, it seemed to defy physics and redefine what was possible in professional football. The crowd erupted, and Dempsey was mobbed by teammates. 14. The kick was replayed countless times and became one of the most famous moments in NFL history. But Dempsey's record kick also sparked immediate controversy about whether his specially designed shoe gave him an unfair advantage. Critics argued that the flat, square toe allowed him to generate more power than would be possible with a standard shoe, and they called for the NFL to investigate whether the kick should stand. The controversy intensified as Dempsey continued making long field goals throughout his career, including several kicks from beyond 50 yards that would have been considered impossible for most other kickers. Opposing teams complained that his shoe was giving him an unfair advantage, and there were calls for the league to ban specially designed kicking shoes. In 1977, 7 years after Dempsey's record-setting kick, the NFL implemented the Tom Dempsey rule, requiring all kickers to wear shoes conforming to standard specifications, effectively banning the type of flat-toed shoe Dempsey had used throughout his career. The rule was controversial and seen by many as a direct response to Dempsey's success, essentially punishing him for finding a way to overcome his physical limitations. Dempsey was disappointed by the rule change, but understood the league's reasoning. He continued kicking for several more years using standard shoes, though his effectiveness was somewhat diminished. He retired in 1979 after 11 seasons, having played for 5 different teams and established himself as one of the most accurate and powerful kickers of his era. Jerry Rice, the greatest receiver and his subtle art of separation. Jerry Rice is universally acknowledged as the greatest wide receiver in NFL history, a player whose combination of work ethic, route running precision, and clutch performance set him apart from every other player at the position. During his 20-year career, primarily with the San Francisco 49ers, Rice set virtually every significant receiving record and became the gold standard for all future receivers. But Rice's greatness was not just about natural ability, it was also about his mastery of subtle techniques that allowed him to create separation, including his expert use of the push-off. The push-off is a technique where a receiver uses his hands to create space between himself and a defensive back just before the ball arrives, giving him a crucial advantage in making the catch. While offensive pass interference is technically illegal, the push-off exists in a gray area where receivers can get away with subtle contact that creates separation without drawing a penalty. Rice elevated this technique to an art form, using his hands so skillfully that he rarely got called for offensive pass interference, despite using the technique on virtually every pass play. What made Rice's push-off so effective was not just the physical aspect, but the timing and precision with which he executed it. Rice would run his routes with perfect precision, lulling defensive backs into thinking they had good coverage. Then at the last possible moment, he would use a quick, subtle push to create just enough separation to make the catch. The movement was so smooth and natural that it often looked like the defensive back had simply lost his footing. Rice's mastery of the push-off was the result of countless hours of practice and obsessive attention to detail that was legendary throughout the NFL. He would spend hours working on his hand placement, his timing, and his ability to disguise the push-off so that it looked like natural contact rather than a deliberate attempt to gain advantage. Rice understood that the key to getting away with the push-off was making it look incidental and never so obvious that officials would have no choice but to throw a flag. The technique was particularly effective in crucial situations, such as third downs and in the red zone, where precise route running and the ability to create separation were most important. Rice would often use the push-off to get open for game-winning touchdowns or crucial first downs, and his ability to execute under pressure was one of the things that made him so dangerous in clutch situations. Rice's use of the push-off was well known throughout the league, and defensive backs would often complain to officials about his tactics. However, Rice was so skilled at executing the technique that he was rarely penalized for it. During his entire 20-year career, Rice was called for offensive pass interference only a handful of times, despite using the push-off on hundreds, if not thousands, of plays. Some defensive backs accused Rice of cheating, while others grudgingly admitted that his technique was so skillful it was almost impossible to detect in real time. The controversy intensified during the late 1990s as defensive backs became more vocal about their complaints, and slow-motion replay technology made it easier to see exactly what Rice was doing. In response to growing controversy and complaints from defensive backs, the NFL began cracking down on offensive pass interference in the late 1990s and early 2000s. Officials were instructed to be more vigilant in calling offensive pass interference, with particular emphasis on watching for push-offs and other illegal contact by receivers. The rule changes were not officially named after Rice, but they were widely seen as a response to his dominance and mastery of the push-off technique. Lester Hayes, the Stickum King who made catching impossible. Lester Hayes was one of the most dominant and controversial cornerbacks of the late 1970s and early 1980s. A player whose liberal use of a legal substance called stickum gave him such a significant advantage that the NFL was eventually forced to ban the product entirely. Playing for the Oakland Raiders during their championship years, Hayes became known as much for his unusual preparation rituals as for his exceptional play on the field. Stickum was a pine tar-based adhesive originally designed to help baseball players get a better grip on their bats. In football, players discovered that applying stickum to their hands and arms could dramatically improve their ability to catch and hold on to the ball, as well as to grab and hold on to opposing players. While the substance was legal under NFL rules, Hayes took its use to an extreme never seen before in professional football. Before every game, Hayes would coat his hands, arms, and jersey with massive amounts of stickum, creating a tacky, adhesive surface that made it nearly impossible for receivers to escape his grasp once he got his hands on them. The substance was so thick and sticky that Hayes would often need teammates to help remove his gloves after games, and equipment managers complained that his jerseys were impossible to clean and had to be discarded after each use. The effect of stickum on Hayes's play was dramatic and immediate. Receivers who tried to run routes against him would find themselves unable to break free from his grasp, as the adhesive would cause their jerseys to stick to his hands and arms. Hayes's use of stickum was so effective that he led the NFL in interceptions in 1980 with 13, including 4 interceptions in a single game against the San Diego Chargers. His performance that season was so dominant that he was named NFL Defensive Player of the Year, becoming the first cornerback to win the award. The Raiders' defense, anchored by Hayes' shutdown coverage, was a key factor in their Super Bowl XV victory over the Philadelphia Eagles. But Hayes' use of stickum was also highly controversial, with opposing teams and players complaining that it gave him an unfair advantage and made the game less competitive. Receivers would often come off the field with their jerseys and gloves covered in the sticky residue, and some complained that the substance made it difficult for them to run their routes effectively or to catch passes when they did get open. The controversy reached its peak during the 1981 season when several high-profile receivers and coaches began speaking out publicly about Hayes' use of stickum. Some argued that the substance was essentially a form of cheating, while others contended that it was simply an innovative use of a legal product. In 1981, the NFL banned the use of stickum and other similar adhesive substances, implementing what became known informally as the Lester-Hayes Rule. The ban was comprehensive, prohibiting players from using any foreign substances on their hands, arms, or uniforms that could provide an advantage in gripping the ball or holding on to opponents. The impact of the stickum ban on Hayes' play was immediate and significant. Without his signature adhesive, Hayes was still a good cornerback, but he was no longer the dominant, game-changing player he had been during his stickum years. His interception numbers dropped dramatically, and he was never again selected for the Pro Bowl or named an All-Pro. Roy Williams, the horse-collar tackle that ended careers. Roy Williams was one of the most feared and controversial safeties in NFL history, a player whose aggressive style and devastating tackling ability made him both a fan favorite and a source of constant concern for player safety advocates. Playing primarily for the Dallas Cowboys during the early 2000s, Williams became known for his bone-crushing hits and his willingness to deliver punishment to any receiver who dared venture into his territory. But it was his signature tackling technique, the horse-collar tackle, that ultimately led to one of the most significant rule changes in modern NFL history. The horse-collar tackle was a technique where Williams would grab a ball carrier from behind by the back of their shoulder pads or jersey, using their own momentum against them to bring them down in a violent, twisting motion. The tackle was devastatingly effective, as it was nearly impossible for ball carriers to break free once Williams got his hands on them, and it often resulted in spectacular, highlight reel takedowns. Williams perfected the horse-collar tackle through years of practice and refinement, developing variations he could use in different situations. Sometimes he would grab players by the nameplate on the back of their jersey, using it as a handle to yank them backward and off their feet. Other times, he would hook his fingers inside the shoulder pads themselves, creating an even more secure grip that made escape virtually impossible. What made the horse collar tackle so dangerous was the way it caused ball carriers to fall. When grabbed from behind in this manner, players would often be pulled backward and sideways simultaneously, causing them to land awkwardly on their legs, ankles, or lower back. The unnatural twisting motion put enormous stress on knee and ankle joints, often causing serious injuries that could end careers or require extensive surgery and rehabilitation. Williams used the horse collar tackle throughout his career to devastating effect, becoming one of the most feared tacklers in the NFL. Opposing coaches would warn their players about Williams's technique, but there was little they could do to prepare for the sudden, violent nature of the tackle. Williams was particularly effective against running backs and receivers who were running away from him, as they often had no idea he was approaching until it was too late. The turning point came during a Monday Night Football game on September 7, 2004, when Williams used the horse collar tackle on Philadelphia Eagles wide receiver Terrell Owens. Owens was running a crossing route when Williams grabbed him from behind by the back of his jersey and yanked him to the ground. The tackle looked routine at first, but Owens immediately grabbed his leg in pain and had to be helped off the field. The injury turned out to be a severe ankle sprain that kept Owens out for several weeks and raised serious questions about the safety of Williams's tackling technique. The incident was replayed countless times on television, and slow-motion analysis showed clearly how the horse collar tackle had caused Owens's leg to twist in an unnatural way as he was brought to the ground. But the Owens injury was just the beginning. Over the next several months, Williams's horse collar tackle caused a series of serious injuries to other high-profile players, including a broken leg suffered by Baltimore Ravens running back Musa Smith and a severe ankle injury to New York Giants running back Tiki Barber. Each injury was more serious than the last, and there was growing concern throughout the league that Williams's technique was causing unnecessary and preventable injuries. The final straw came during the 2004 playoffs, when Williams used the horse collar tackle on Eagles safety Brian Dawkins, causing a serious neck injury that required immediate medical attention. The injury was particularly shocking because Dawkins was known as one of the toughest and most durable players in the league, and seeing him writhing in pain on the field sent a clear message that something needed to be done. In 2005, the NFL implemented the Roy Williams rule, which banned the horse collar tackle and made it a 15-yard personal foul penalty. The rule specifically prohibited defenders from grabbing ball carriers from behind by the back of their shoulder pads or jersey and using that grip to bring them to the ground. The ban was comprehensive and included any tackle where a defender grabbed a player from behind in the nameplate area or above. The impact of the Roy Williams rule was immediate and significant. Williams was forced to completely change his tackling technique, and his effectiveness as a defender was noticeably diminished. Without his signature horse collar tackle, Williams was still a good safety, but he was no longer the game-changing, fear-inducing presence he had been during his prime years.